Alright, guys, so if you think things were bad enough, Canada just made it worse. Decoupling has just gone from here to here. A month ago, their foreign minister Jolie went all the way to Beijing. She visited Wang Yi and talked about building back relations. And this is what I don't understand. Canada was afraid of a global trade war if Trump came back. So hedging their bets with China kinda makes sense. Two-way trade was around $100 billion and is growing year after year. But Justin Trudeau just declared a new trade war with China. Now, the optics here are extremely bad. It doesn't make economic sense and it just confirms the worst that whatever the US wants, Canada will follow suit. And very soon, Canadians, well, you might be forced to pay more for inferior goods. Now, this is a little weird because once upon a time, Trudeau was praising China like he was their biggest fan.
That the priorities that President Xi has put forward around inclusive growth, around innovation, around investment in the future, around opportunities for everyone, these are things that are deeply important to Canada as well. So I'm very pleased that we're going to be able to amplify that message that you can't cut your way to growth. You have to believe in the future and invest in the future. You have to create the kind of world in which people will have chances to succeed. And what China has been able to do over the past few decades of lifting 700 million people out of poverty, of adding 300 million people to the global middle class, I mean, this is extraordinary.
But now things have fundamentally changed. Canada has started a trade war with the second biggest economy in the world, and the punishments coming are just as bad as the US.
So today, we're taking yet another step to ensure that Canada is the country of choice to make the things that'll drive the new 21st century green economy. We're listening to automakers, we're listening to workers. Shortly, we will be introducing a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles and a 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum.
So you heard it, 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. In addition to that, a painful 25% hit on steel and aluminum imports. And it's going to come as fast as this October. If you are Canadian and you always wanted that EV from BYD, well, you can kiss that dream goodbye. It's not going to happen. The entire North American market is now closed to electric vehicles from China. So why is Canada doing something so self-destructive long-term? Well, because the majority of their trade is with the US, especially in the auto sector. Over 1.5 million cars, the vast majority of Canadian production, were exported to the US last year. Many US car companies, including Ford and GM, they all have factories based in Canada. And these are cars that have a high cost of production. Chinese EVs will just grab market share because they are so much more affordable. It will just decimate the entire industry. Slapping a 100% tariff is basically an admission that you can't compete. The pressure from the US and the EU automakers in Canada is also very tremendous. Since 2020, nearly $15 billion of investments have been poured into the auto industry there. $3 billion from Ford, $3 billion from GM, and over $8 billion from Stellantis. So there are big entrenched interests in the country. Trudeau is aligning economic policy closely with the US. The goal, of course, is to keep affordable Chinese cars out. Now, in the short term, this might be good. You protect US brands and you protect the Canadian workers. But long term, you just destroy the need to be competitive. Canada will set themselves back in this new green transition. Now, by 2035, the government wants all cars sold to be zero emissions. In other words, EVs need to become the norm. This is extremely ambitious to really put it nicely, right? Well, good luck achieving that. It's going to be either impossible or extremely, extremely expensive. A big point of contention is the topic of subsidies, but there are actually two kinds out there. The first is overt subsidies. Governments like the US and China, they pump tons of money to their industries to lower the cost of production. In Canada's case, it's the consumer who will be paying a higher sticker price for the same or often worse product. The consumer will be subsidizing car companies in Canada who can then jack prices up. Now, Trudeau's justification for the tariff doesn't make much sense. Listen to this. We are transforming Canada's automotive sector to be a global leader in building the vehicles of tomorrow. But actors like China have chosen to give themselves an unfair advantage in the global marketplace. And because Canada relies on US automakers, the innovation will have to come from them. After this fiasco, I don't really think companies like BYD or NIO they're going to build a factory in Ottawa. Building your own EV from scratch isn't simple. It involves a whole lot of moving parts and requires cheap inputs, especially when it comes to batteries. US automakers haven't accomplished that yet. In fact, they are in big trouble today. Ford is abandoning their latest EV model. This cancellation is going to cost the company $1.9 billion. All that money was wasted. Going forward, the story gets even worse. Ford's spending on EVs will drop from 40% of capex to only 30%. So R&D, research and development into electric vehicles is going to fall down as well. Relying on US automakers to drive innovation is probably a very bad idea. China's already there, they're the global leader. The only way to make this happen is for the government to drop a ton of money. North America will have to build their own supply chains from scratch, so they will have to adopt the Chinese playbook of subsidies once again. But is that even possible? Even with the big money drop, operating a supply chain is extremely expensive. Ford is scaling back their plans for $3.5 billion battery plant in Michigan. The challenge once again is labor costs rising. And with this trade war escalating, if China restricts all the critical imports, this will cripple their G7 competitors. That's why you really gotta wonder a bit. Canada initiating a trade war with China is really disingenuous. There will likely be retaliation 99.99%. Beijing will build higher walls to block Canadian exports as well. More importantly, the future of EVs in North America is finished. The story is done. But let's hop on to our next piece, which foreshadows another threat of decoupling, and this time it's insane. It revolves around the airline and aviation industry. A year back, US airline companies wanted the US government to ban Chinese flights, and if they were flying to or from the US and the planes went over Russian airspace, well, it's a no go. And I think we can immediately see how desperate this is. Because of the airspace ban, US carriers as well as Europe simply can't compete with their Chinese competitors. If we read into the letter from the airlines to Anthony Blinken, we can see a long list of grievances. It revolves around how US carriers stopped flying through Russia since the start of 2022. The rest of the letter goes through how the Chinese government favors their own airlines and how over 300,000 workers are at risk because of China's anti competitive stance. I bet that it will revolve around subsidies and overcapacity once again. Those words will come out sooner or later. Yes, Russia did close their airspace to the US and many other Western countries, but it was due in part to Biden's own aviation sanctions on Russia. He started the whole fiasco. Just listen to this.
We're coming for your ill-begotten gains, and tonight I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy.
So Western airlines now want Chinese carriers to give up their advantage. It wouldn't be an issue if President Biden didn't go out guns blazing in the first place. In the Chinese market, foreign airlines used to compete neck and neck with Chinese carriers. In 2019, there were around 100 million seats booked to China. Half went to domestic Chinese brands, the other half went to other airlines, especially the G7 carriers. But the situation has flipped. Airlines like China Southern and China Eastern now control 63% of the market. 2 out of 3 flights to China are from a Chinese carrier. Reverting to protectionism isn't going to work. Sure, you can ban Chinese flights to the US, but Beijing can also ban US carriers from operating in China as well. And should that happen, we'll be back to a deadly spiral of decoupling. revenues and profits for US airlines will collapse even further. But here's something to note. The majority of Chinese airline business comes from their own domestic economy, not really international. Domestic China passenger numbers are up by 18% versus a year back, and this hit a new record in 2023. So more people are flying from one part of China to another, for example from Beijing to Sichuan, or from Shanghai to Hong Kong or to Macau. It's domestic travel that's increasing. The real worry the West should have is the decimation of their aviation industry. Boeing, for example, is making a lot of mistakes both on planet Earth and in outer space. I'm sure everyone knows about the recent problems Boeing has with their planes. Even the US Congress isn't very happy with the quality of planes made by the company.
What is it that you get paid currently?
That's a big number, sir.
Well, let me help you out. It's $32.8 million this year. They found one door seal being lubricated with Dawn liquid dish soap and cleaned with a wet cheesecloth, and another was being checked with a hotel room key card.
The door issue was an issue in manufacturing, and I'm representing engineering. The engineering design of the door is not implicated.
And these are US lawmakers themselves complaining, telling the world that Boeing has very big issues. And for China, it's a pretty clear-cut affair. When the time comes, and it's coming real soon, they will be replacing Western planes with their own. COMAC, which is China's own aerospace company, is about to deliver their own jets to Air China and Southern Airlines. It's a big milestone as well as a deadly warning to the G7. Sooner or later, Airbus and Boeing planes will get replaced. If things get worse, this timetable will only accelerate. The more the West hammers on China, it will just spur them to become more self-sufficient. It's not just EVs or semiconductors anymore. A gigantic market for jet planes is about to go local. Boeing projects China will account for 20% of global airplane demand. The Chinese market will need around 6,500 single-aisle planes. However, because of the economic war, it's very likely Boeing's market share will get eaten away. And it makes total sense here. Everything is going domestic now, and it's not just a matter of price anymore. COMAC planes, more or less, they are on the same level as Airbus and Boeing. They are using Chinese carriers to build a track record before venturing into the international market. And this is the true danger to Western aerospace companies. In 2022, the orders of single-aisle aircraft hit nearly 1,000 for China. Airbus is the big winner, but China's COMAC with their C919 is in second place. This will only get worse for the duopoly over time. If this trade war continues to explode, China will slowly edge out Western brands for their own. It's a lose-lose proposition for the G7 economies. So if there's one takeaway today, it's how bad things will continue to get between China and the West. Every time we see some sort of backtracking or resolution, the rug gets put beneath our feet. EVs and solar panels are only the start. By imposing big tariffs on stuff made in China, the West is trying to get manufacturers to head back to the West, journey back to the West. It's part of the friend-shoring strategy. Tesla, for example, is a victim. They have their gigafactory in Shanghai making all those fancy EVs. The Canadian tariffs could force more domestic production back to their factories in North America. How do you think China will see this? So the effects of this goes beyond just trade barriers, and we can be sure China is planning some sort of retaliation. Canada just made the G7 China trade war even worse. But let me know what you think. How will China hit back? And is Canada making a terrible mistake? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.